Hi, I'm Jim Zogby, and welcome to Viewpoint. My co-host on tonight's program is Maya Berry. She's Executive Director of the Arab American Institute and a host of Viewpoint when I'm away. Tonight, we'll talk to a group of young Arab activists who are visiting from the Middle East and North Africa about their perceptions of the U.S. and their hopes and their concerns about their native countries. But first, I want to welcome talk show host and political commentator Bill Press, former co-host of CNN's Crossfire and The Spin Room. He currently hosts the nationally syndicated Bill Press Show and writes a syndicated column for Tribune Media Services, author of 6 books, including his latest, The Obama Hate Machine, The Lies, Distortions, and Personal Attacks of the President, and Who's Behind Them. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, good to see you, Jim. Maya.
I'd say we have to stop getting together like this. We keep talking about your books when they come out. You know.
Good. I'll keep writing more.
I want to. I want to talk about the latter part of the book at some point, but I want to start with the early part, just for our listeners' sake. The history, which was kind of interesting, as sort of a snapshot view of have we ever been here before. Give us a couple of examples of other presidents who faced the kind of abusive harassment from media and from opponents that President Obama is facing right now.
It is funny with this. And by the way, I have to start by saying, you know, I cover the White House. I'm there every day for the briefings. And criticism of any American president, I think, is legitimate. You know, what I point out in the book is that we haven't seen in modern times, I don't think since Abraham Lincoln, anybody who's received the kind of personal attacks that have been leveled against President Obama. But we've sort of come full circle because we think of politics before Obama as being, or before our modern period, maybe as being all nice and polite. It didn't start out that way. If you really want probably the dirtiest presidential campaign ever was in 1800. John Adams versus Thomas Jefferson. They didn't do the attacking, but their supporters did. I mean, the Jefferson people said of John Adams, they called him his rotundity. They said he wanted to make this a kingdom because he actually thought that George Washington should have been called His Majesty rather than Mr. President. So he had those sort of royal airs. They said he was going to put this back to a kingdom with him and his sons as his heirs. And then the Adams people put out the word that Thomas Jefferson, who was a deist and known not to be a practicing Christian, that he would seize people's Bibles and burn people's Bibles. So it was pretty ugly there. We even got up to the times in the Congress where the method of dealing with disputes was to invite people out to Bladensburg for a duel. There were senators and members of Congress who came to blows on the floor of the House. So there's a violent strain up to, I'm not sure when it all stopped, but with Lincoln, I talk a lot about Abraham Lincoln because we think of him as Saint Abe. But he was, in his day, he was really reviled. He was not St. Abe until he was assassinated. Just one quick thing, if I may. I love, this is the way Lincoln was described by one of the newspapers here in Washington when he came to Washington. Mr. Lincoln stands 6 feet tall in his socks, which he changes once every 10 days. His anatomy is composed mostly of bones. When walking, he resembles the offspring of a happy marriage between a derrick and a windmill. He can hardly be called handsome, though he is certainly much better looking since he had the smallpox. I mean, you know, this is really
That's
right.
tough.
Tough, right. But then, for the most part, it was policy differences with presidents, which again is very legitimate. So when I go to the White House every day, there are always people out front protesting. And I love that. I always stop by to see kind of what the issue of the day is. And so, you know, that's one thing. You couldn't maybe do that in front of the Kremlin, right, or some other places in this country. Well, we can. But I do think the differences ought to be on policy. And with Obama, they've been personal, ugly, nasty attacks.
And even where they're policy, they sort of mask the personal issues about his wealth or his having gone to Harvard or his not being like us. Let's just focus on him for a minute, because you list all the books that have been written about him.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
it's an industry. I mean, 60-something books have been published already, attack books,
Right.
on him.
And at this time in the George Bush presidency, there were maybe 5, right? So again, it's a legitimate target, but the right wing has made an industry of anti-Obama books.
And I thought I had a handle on it during the Clinton years, given the fact that we were still playing out the anti-war thing. And there was this sort of, our generation had this internal tension over the supporters of the war and the opponents of the war, and I thought it was playing out. This is different. This is different because it is so personal and so virulent in tone. Is it the economy? Is it that he's black? Is it, what is it? I mean, what are the factors here that create not the what Maya and you are going to talk about, which is the guys who are funding it and paying for it, but what's creating the sentiment here that produces this virulent reaction to the president and the man?
I wish I had, in like 2 sentences, the answer to that, because I've thought a lot about it and talked a lot about it and talked to a lot of people about it. I think it's a combination of factors. You mentioned race. Race is certainly, we cannot deny it, race is certainly a big factor. There is a segment of this population that cannot stand the fact that there's an African American in the Oval Office. You can't deny that. I mean, it is real. And as in any form of racism, that leads people to say and do some very strange and ugly things.
We've got some posters up that people have had at demonstrations. They're gross.
Yeah, and like I've been to a lot of Tea Party rallies. You go to the Tea Party rallies, the posters that they have of some of them overtly racist, and others just.
That's what some of the ones we've shown are.
Just,
They're really horrible.
Maybe the one with Obama with white face instead of black face. And the whole mystery. But there's something else about the person of Obama that just drives them crazy. I think part of it is because they realize that he's so popular, he's so effective, he's so articulate. People like him, and that also drives them crazy. I mean, to the point where I think the birther movement sums it up. I mean, they deny his legitimacy as an American, as a president, and almost as a human being, And so I call it, I'm not the only one who's called it this othering of President Obama, that they feel they have to show that he's almost from another planet, David, blank on his last name now, David Horowitz, Los Angeles, used to be a liberal, now as far right-wing as you can get. Horowitz calls this the Obama derangement syndrome. That people hate him so much, that they just, and I think a lot of it is too that people see that, I mean, they lost power and they see he's so good they may not get power back for a long time.
Maya?
You laid out in your book a very sort of clear pattern of what this is, who funds it, who's sort of enabled it, and what the end effect has been. I want to start with the machine part of it and the Chicago style machine. Talk a bit about the Koch brothers, and I know that they've done a great deal before the election of President Obama in terms of funding right-wing movements, but their particular emphasis on the president. If you can help us a bit with that.
Right, and I do want to put a postscript on Jim's last question, which is the thing that is the Obama hate machine goes on and on and on. It's like every day there's a new chapter written. Just a few days ago, we saw this plan that was presented to Joe Ricketts, the head of the Chicago Cubs, to launch a $10 million campaign during the Democratic Convention accusing Obama, going back to the Reverend Jeremiah Wright days. Now, Ricketts says, I'm not going to do that now, but he was going to, and I think they may still go there.
And you almost don't need to, because what they just did was get 2 free days of press.
Of course.
Doing the story anyway.
Yeah. And then in Arizona, the Secretary of State said they may not put President Obama on the ballot because they don't think he's born in the United States. When will they ever accept the word from the state of Hawaii? They know where he was born. They know when he was born. Neil Abercrombie, the mayor or the governor of Hawaii, who was one of the President Obama's father's best friends, he said, I didn't see him actually be born, but I saw the mother before she went in the hospital, and I visited her with the baby in the hospital. I mean, what more do you need? So, but this whole thing is engineered, in this case, by these two brothers, the Koch brothers, who flew below the radar until about a year ago. Who are they? They're Charles and David Koch, head of Koch Industries. They're the third and fourth wealthiest men in America, after Warren Buffett and Bill Gates. Now, we know them, don't know much about the Koch brothers. They're worth about $50 billion, the two of them together. And their passion, unlike Bill Gates, world health, or Warren Buffett, tax reform or other good causes they support, the Koch brothers are all about protecting the oil and gas industry and fueling right-wing politics. And they see Barack Obama as their #1 threat. So their tentacles are everywhere. I identify 57 different organizations that they have funded. And right now, all of those organizations are directed toward bringing down Barack Obama. They also have, and they include, like the American Heritage Foundation, the Cato Foundation, the Cato Institute, Americans for Prosperity is a political activist organization. That's all Koch brothers funded. Dick Armey's organization, America Works, I think it's called.
I think we put America in almost anything you come up with an organization,
yeah,
right?
Right. And then the big one right now is ALEC, it's the American Legislative Exchange Council.
Yeah.
ALEC writes model legislation and sends it out, and then they have seminars. They get state legislators together. They pay them to come. They give them model legislation, and these guys take it back to their states. All of the voter suppression laws introduced are all from ALEC. The Stand Your Ground law in Florida, Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman fame, is all from ALEC. All of the legislation overturning anything to do with global warming or climate change is all funded by ALEC. And they have twice a year, the Koch brothers get their corporate buddies together in some luxury retreat and raise money. They just, 2 days before this book came out, they had a weekend where they raised $100 million, all to fuel ads. These are independent ads, independent of the campaign, against Barack Obama. And they pour their own money in. They've given more money to politics than anybody else. George Soros or any of those people, forget it. I mean, they're penny ante compared to the Koch brothers.
It's funny you should mention George Soros, because when I read in your book the #1, #2, and then 3 and 4, I thought to myself, George Soros, for many people, is a common household name as this like progressive funder of institutions, but yet there really is very little until recently about the Koch brothers. I want to ask you a bit about, because you mentioned, for example, when you start here, that you're well aware of the need to criticize our elected officials, and that's part and parcel of how we do our politics.
I made a good living at it.
Of course. And you talk a bit in your book about the legislative battles that are expected when you have, say, a Republican led Congress and a Democratic president. But speak to us a bit about how you think that this is different than that in terms of whether it's healthcare reform or just the way that it's actually played out in Washington.
Well, I mean, I'm not the only one to say that politics is broken today, particularly the congressional system is broken today. I mean, we are all old enough to remember there was a day when, during the election, you fought like hell to get for your side. And then as soon as the election was over, the winners and the losers sat down around the table to say, okay, we have our differences, but here are the problems facing us. How can we tackle them? How can we work together to solve these problems? That does not exist today. And you know what it changed? It changed when Newt Gingrich became Speaker. But once Gingrich came in, it was all politics, all campaigning, all the time. And that's what it is today. So the days of a Howard Baker, the days of a Bob Dole, or a Tom Daschle, I would say even a Trent Lott, up as recently as that, they're gone. And the people that get in there today, look at John Boehner. John Boehner is not in charge. It's the tail wagging the dog. So that's what's really changed. So with President Obama, who really, I think, he presented himself as, and he really wanted to be, the first post-partisan president. talk in the book, and they didn't let him, I guess is my point. And Mitch McConnell said, the first day of the Obama administration, our #1 goal for the next 4 years is to deny Barack Obama a second term.
I want to get at a couple things.
What does that tell you about the ability to get anything done?
Two of your chapters focus on the otherness of the president, othering him. And you start, I want to commend you actually for putting in the entire text of the Mark Penn memo to Hillary Clinton, which I think it serves as an indictment of the fact that this was a bipartisan effort from the get-go. He is not one of us. He is different, and emphasize that. And it started there, and it's gone to where it is. It's interesting. Romney turns down the idea of doing the Jeremiah Wright, but in all of his ads uses the more subtle, I'm one of you, I'm an American, I want the soul of America, as if the president himself doesn't want all that. But Newt Gingrich, maybe one of the, you mentioned him, one of the more extreme versions of this, using language that was not unlike Glenn Beck or Mike Savage language, had this to say. I want to just put it up. If Obama's so outside our comprehension, if only you understand Kenyan anti-colonial behavior, can you begin to piece together his actions? You quote that in the book. There's the sense of him being foreign. He's not like us.
No, that's a good part of the otherness, the othering, right? He's got a funny name. He's black. He wasn't born in the mainland United States. He wasn't even born in the United States. I mean, it goes on and on. Yeah. And this idea that there's a Kenyan anti-colonial, that's what he's all about. Because his father was or his grandfather was some political activist. His father, whom he saw twice in his life, I mean, after his father, saw him when he was a kid, and then when his father visited him once, that was all of his time, and he was, what, maybe 10 years old? The idea that he is, in his presidency, following some political agenda written by his father is just absurd. And a guy like Gingrich would put that forth.
Which makes me wonder, if Barack Obama were white, would any of this be happening?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Oh, look, they would not embrace him.
No,
but
right.
I think they would be. I don't want to say, and I don't say, as you know in the book, I don't say it's all racist, but it clearly. And
I also wonder in the issue that we've talked about, which is, if his name weren't Barack Hussein Obama, would we have these same guys who fund this hate Obama also funding the Islamophobia industry, which is in some ways just a way of sort of delegitimizing Islam and the president at the same time. It's a twofer.
It's a twofer.
Yeah. Which
is why, what was it, before the primary, just this spring in Alabama and Mississippi, I think it was something like 57% of Republicans in Mississippi think he's a Muslim.
Yeah.
Because they've tied, and of course for them, Muslim is synonymous with terrorist.
Yeah.
You know, they've tied the two together very successfully.
Yeah.
Even though I don't think Barack Obama has stepped foot in a mosque since he's been president.
Actually, he's distanced himself from that in order to not invite this.
Yeah. No, that's. I want to stay with that. That you referred to it as the othering of him, both as a candidate and then as a president. And it's actually a term we're very familiar with because we, in our work,
live with it. I guess.
Yeah, I mean, this is part of what our work has been about. To sort of explain to our fellow Americans that whether it's Arab Americans or American Muslim, that there really is an element of just like you concept. So when you take a President Barack Hussein Obama, emphasis on the middle name, which we celebrated greatly and enjoyed in terms of the candidacy, but the point is, when you took that during this campaign and turned, you listed in your book as one of the derogatives, and I know you don't intend in terms of its meaning, but whether he was a neo-Nazi, whether it's this, whether it's that, and Muslim, this closeted Muslim charge has been a very important piece of making him not like me for Americans. How do you think that has played out in terms of at least the continued political discourse since his election?
Well, I think it's powerful. You know, and their objective again is to deny his legitimacy, right? And he's not someone we can trust. I mean, they're playing on the 9/11 fears, I think, and trying to keep those alive. And they see Barack Obama with the middle name of Hussein as a convenient tool for doing that. I think it's an undercurrent through all the Republican politics today, and all the criticism and attacks against President Obama. I mean, he gives them, in a sense, a little ammunition in that he is different. Comes from a mixed race marriage, right? Raised by his grandparents, lived in Indonesia, and has this name, right? As he says, a skinny kid from Chicago with big ears and with a funny name, right? So, but they translate that into, you know, I list all the names, right? They call him a fascist, a socialist, a communist, a Nazi, a jackass. But on that list is Muslim, right? And they see it as bad as all the rest.
I remember when he gave that speech, and he said that skinny kid with a funny name, and then he turned to the side, and he said, and by the way, did I mention he's black?
Oh, yeah.
And I thought it was cute as an understatement of the obvious, but the outrage from Glenn Beck, et cetera, the next day was indicative of the fact that he'd actually pierced the wound. Mm-hmm. He'd cut to the quick, and they accused him of playing the race card by pointing out
before they did, right?
Yeah,
yeah. Right.
But there is this convergence of the economy making people insecure, 9/11 still insecurity, a president with a funny name who, by the way, is African American, all playing into this white middle class, middle-aged insecurity over a real problem, which is the economy's under stress.
Right, right. And that's the other factor, too, is it's easier, as we all know, in tough times to get scapegoats and to make these arguments. It's easier for somebody like a Mitt Romney to say, I can fix it, right? Because people are hurting, and so when somebody comes up and presents themselves as, I got better ideas. He doesn't even tell us what his ideas are.
But he's a square-jawed white guy.
Exactly. Square-jawed white guy who looks like the Easter Island head or something like that, right?
And to his credit, he has not raised this, in part because the Mormon issue is a big one.
Well, oh, you mean he hasn't raised, yes.
Yeah,
right.
you know, I mean, and he slapped it down whenever it came up, because I think that it's a matter of concern with him as well, that it not become an issue. I mean, the Mormon versus the we think he's a Muslim is not a comfortable choice for a lot of folks who are the undecided voters in this contest.
When you look at polling for this, it's Mormons and then Muslims. I mean, Muslims in terms of negative perspectives on this.
Is that
so
right?
It's not
Mormon,
very,
and then Muslim.
Yeah.
Right.
But at the bottom of
the bottom of the list.
Yeah.
So that's absolutely true. I think is that you know, he's got to be careful on that front because it's very close and could hit home.
It's the last thing. It's the last thing that Romney wants is to have a referendum on Mormonism. And I think it's the last thing any of us want, really, in terms of religious test for public office.
Let's just look at this McCain clip from the last election, because it was an interesting moment. It was John McCain trying to be brave, trying to be bold. There's a little sort of slip of the thing here, but let's put it up, because it was where the folks, Sarah Palin, and he played the Mark Penn memo to the hilt on American versus, and here's what came up.
I got to ask you a question. I do not I can't trust Obama. I have read about him, and he's an Arab. He is not. No, ma'am.
No, ma'am. He's a decent family man, citizen that I just happen to have disagreements with on fundamental issues, and that's what this campaign is all about. He's not. Thank you.
To his credit, he did that. I wrote a piece, though, in Huffington Post that was one of my biggest pieces to date at the time, saying, John McCain, I'm an Arab and a decent family man. Yeah, but he was trying to be good. And I think,
was.
Are we going to get there
Meanwhile,
again?
his vice presidential nominee was out there saying he pals around with terrorists.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Are we going to get there again in this cycle, or do you think that the matchup of Mitt Romney, Barack Obama will tamp down?
Here's what I worry about.
We have just a minute or so left.
Okay, quickly. I don't think Mitt Romney will go there. I think he'll make it a point of not going there. I would expect the worst from the super PACs. We've got something we're playing with this time we've never had before. And so the Koch brothers aren't the only ones now with their own super PACs. We have seen, like with this aborted, perhaps, Jeremiah Wright, Joe Resnick thing, the super PACs are independent. They can run any ugly stuff they want. They're not controlled by the campaign. They don't have to report where the money is coming from. It's a new force and a dangerous force in American politics.
I want to get you to comment, too, on what was another component of this, which you said was the compliant media. Some willingly, as you've pointed out, and some perhaps not, either unwillingly or perhaps not noticed. You made the point about a government-sponsored program in terms of the number of times that word was used with regards to healthcare reform. But now, removed from that, moving forward, how do you think that all?
Minute left.
I just have to say, as a member of the media, I'm chagrined and embarrassed and disappointed in the job the media has done covering this political cycle, because I think too often they are either too eager to just repeat the lies of the other side, or they're just too lazy to do their own homework. And so they just, you know, Boehner will say something, Romney will say something, they'll report it as if it's fact. I mean, when Boehner keeps saying, for example, let's take your example, right? That President Obama's health is government-run health care. It is not, no way, no how. No, government isn't involved. It's 36 million more customers for private insurance companies. But they say it, and it gets reported. And the media is not doing its job by calling them out on it.
The book is The Obama Hate Machine, The Lies, Distortions, and Personal Attacks on the President and Who's Behind Them. The author is Bill Press. Watch his show on Current TV.
Current TV.
And buy the book. When we come back, we're going to talk to a group of young Arab activists who are visiting the U.S. from the Middle East and North Africa about their perceptions of this country and their hopes for their native countries. Stay with us.